All right. Uh, Good afternoon. Happy to have with me Paul Prager, co-founder and CEO of TeraWulf. I've had the pleasure of knowing Paul for a few years now, and it's been amazing to see the transition that Wolf has uh, undergone. I think on that note, you know, take us a step back 2 years ago. Were you guys doing at that time that positioned you guys to go through the transition from Bitcoin mining to AI? How is the company positioned that allowed it to?
Sure. So most of you guys know that the genesis of TeraWulf was energy infrastructure. And so we always were simply looking for the best solution, the highest value for our energy infrastructure. There was a moment in time when that seemed like it was Bitcoin mining, very flexible load, pretty volatile commodity. And you were able to sort of take energy that was otherwise not storageable, if you will, and turn it into something of value that you could store. I was uncomfortable with the business, to be honest with you. I didn't like the volatility. It reminded me of what had happened in the power space. When I built power plants, we would have long-term high-quality credit as off-takers, utilities, sovereigns, municipalities. That market evolved as demand evolved into spot market, as people didn't like the regulators making long-term bets on gas pricing and electricity pricing. I didn't like the spot market. It didn't lead to efficient financing, which led to difficult financings. So I didn't like where Bitcoin was headed. We were looking for a solution. High power compute and AI was the solution, and it is the solution. It was very much like going home. Today, we build our data centers out to our energy infrastructure. And so we're back doing what we always did, which was ensure we have the highest quality sites with energy infrastructure in spades. We look for long-term offtake agreements with the very best financial credits. We then finance that efficiently, and we design and operate and build to the best of our ability. That seems to have proven to be of merit. We have two great customers here. G42, Core 42 is the surrogate. And then we have the combination, of course, of Fluid Stack with the end user, which is Company A and Google. And I think, and we've got repeat business with them, and we have demand for repeat business with both. So TeraWulf today reflects high quality energy infrastructure, great engineering design team, great execution skill set, which is why they want to repeat. I think we've led the way through Patrick Fleury, dynamite CFO, and transparency and reporting. And we've created some of the financing mechanisms that are being used by others in the peer group today. And we are only as good as our last execution. So we put it on the line at every single one of our sites with our customers every day.
I guess at Lake Mariner, you guys gone through probably a couple of different iterations of designs for CB1, CB2, CB3. What have you learned kind of across those iterations that give you confidence now that you can go to a new site, rinse and repeat? This is what it's going to look like.
So our first customer was Core 42, G42. And to be honest with you, they are a remarkable customer. And by the way, they're okay now. I talk to my partners in UAE sort of every 2 or 3 days, and I talk to their owners, Mubadala, sort of every 2 or 3 days. And they're all in great shape and safe, and quite supportive of what the U.S. is doing over there. They weren't organized. And I say this respectfully because they weren't the end user. They're sort of a proxy for a cloud or a super cloud. And so they took capacity without necessarily having an end user. So they weren't organized around design. So what we were doing for them was sort of being creative and working with them to try and figure out what exactly they wanted. And they had brought in Dell, and that relationship between those two was a little bit complicated. So I think we learned a lot of lessons because we sort of tried it all. It was like a smorgasbord of how to build a data center. And by the way, it wasn't at a risk. These are exceptional customers. They look at everything as a collaboration. So whatever changes they wanted to make, that was okay. It was on their dime, and we would help think it through with them. CB 4 and 5 was really the first opportunity we had, and that was with Google. At a reference design. So 2 years ago, we didn't have a reference design, but now we really have one, and it's proven. So it's proven so well, by the way, that I think you'll find other companies at this conference using my design. So CB4 and 5 is a reference design, 168 megawatts, getting the benefit of scale, getting the benefit of a complete procurement process because you're doing it all in advance, consistent with the design requirements. And I think we're demonstrating real credibility with it in our ability to execute. And I think as we grow, like the next big construction will be Kentucky, you'll see that design because we had Ramble's engineers folded in to the floor EPC contract. So you'll see that reference design, and we'll start to see optimization of that design, but at least we're not recreating the wheel. So I think it's important. You didn't ask this question, but I'm on this line of thought. I think it's important to think about customers from the standpoint of culturally, are they aligned with you? Because my customers are the best. I talk to Ben Traynor at Google multiple times a week. I've talked to his boss, Thomas Kurland, number 3 guy at Google. We talk to the Company A guys about installation and their needs. You don't build a complex project like this without bumps in the road. I've told some of the people today, I mean, I built power plants in Montana. We were flying steel in upstate New York in 25, 30 knot winds. We bought magnetic shoes for our team to go on the roof to be able to sort of put in cover so that we could start on the inside of our data halls and protect equipment that we were installing there. I mean, you want to have a partner who is your partner. You want to say, okay, we're going to lose schedule there, but we can make it up if we do this. But if we do that, that's expensive. Who's going to pay for it? And you want a partner that says, we're in. And so we've been very, very fortunate in both G42 and the Google Company A Fluid Stack partnership to have just that.
Before we move on from Lake Mariner, I know we are in queue for another 250 there. I believe that's going to come this year.
That's right.
I know last time we spoke, when we talked about how the state likes the flexible load that you have there with Bitcoin mining. So what is the ultimate vision for the 250 you hit? Would you keep it for Bitcoin mining, or would you translate that to another 200 of additional IT?
Right. As I've shared with I guess anyone who's heard me before, New York State has a very robust grid and a very sophisticated grid operator. And when you're bringing on these loads, which is why, by the way, we've challenged some of the notions of bringing on 1 gig and 2 gig data centers in Deep West Texas. You know, it requires a lot more than just having the ability to build generation. Transmission is an important element here, and how to balance that transmission, because you can't just hang a heavy load at one end of a very long line and hope that's going to work. It's never going to work. Transmission must be tense. So the grid operator has asked us to keep our Bitcoin mining online because he uses us, he cycles us to manage his grid. He is now getting accustomed to the loads that we're bringing on. And so we're finding he needs us a little less and less, but he doesn't know what's out there for him in future growth of demand. And I think the answer is that certainly within the next 2 years, we'll be out of the Bitcoin mining business. And it's great because we would expect to have 750 megawatts there. We would then hope to grow beyond it if there is demand for that site. But But right now, we have between that and then we have Cayuga and then we have Kentucky and now we've got Morgantown. We'll be building at least 250 to 500 megawatts, a year through the end of the decade.
Maybe switching to Kentucky, recently acquired site. Actually, before Kentucky, let's go Cayuga. Dropped this into the portfolio last year. I know last year you said between Mariner and Cayuga, this is 2 of the 10 best data center sites in the country. Do you still feel that way? And what are you seeing from a demand signal for Cayuga? Or is it just kind of falling a bit behind Kentucky given where Kentucky is today?
Yeah, listen, I'm the largest shareholder of that company, just under 60 million shares. Management owns about 30% of the company. So I would respectfully submit, I'm very much aligned with the shareholders. So we don't put a site into our portfolio unless we think, that dog's going to hunt. I love Lake Mariner. I love its location. I love the redundancy of the 345 kV lines. I love the relationship we have with the grid operator. I love the source of generation mix up there. And I love that zone A is a surplus generator. I love Cayuga for a lot of the same reasons, but an additional one, which I think is really cool. The market has evolved, and I think you all are well aware of this, into the notion of having your own capacity. And we should talk about that at some point, or I'm happy after this to entertain any questions. But this notion of bringing your own generation is a real notion. It's a real notion so that you can have redundancy. It's a real notion because from a regulatory framework, states and regions are starting to enact this notion of, I'll give you an interconnect, but show me your nameplate capacity, because we don't want to have to justify to our ratepayers that we're giving you power and the price is going up. So you have to demonstrate in certain states already nameplate capacity. It's important because you can, when you bring your own generation, cut in front of the queue like you can in PJM to get an interconnect. And fourthly, it's important because it can help you on the local permitting front. In this new world where people are worried about the cost of electricity and they're lining up to maybe stand against you, if you have the ability to bring generation to the site, you have a winning argument. Not only that, you may have a shortcut to permitting, because some states, like New York, have rules that if you could bring a renewable generation to the state, you could avoid local permitting and go straight to the state, because states are short power. Cayuga has the unique capability to do a massive solar facility there with battery storage if you need be, which would enable expedient expediting the permit process. We're not there yet, because part of me also likes the negotiation with the town of, I'm building a data center, it won't emit, we won't draw water from the lake. I could also build a power plant. Which one do you want? So we'll see how that goes, because you really want to be partners with the community as well. But that's why I love Cayuga so much. I think Cayuga hasn't fallen behind. It's just been, it's been superseded by the immediacy of that 480 megawatts of available power in Kentucky, which is a bit of a unicorn. Carrie was in the audience. She didn't want to come up stage. She found that site, her team, and it's tough to find a site where you can immediately have a contract with the utility for 480 megawatts at great market pricing. And we do. Breck, the utility, already said, yeah, you're in, board approved the deal. Pro-business environment in Kentucky. I was with Governor Beshear just a week and a half ago. By the way, he's running for national office. So, by the way, is the governor of Maryland. So there are 2 guys I get to be supportive of. But I mean, pro-business, 4 interconnects on the site, 480 megawatts of immediately available power. The utilities agreed to it. The utility has even said, if you want to build additional generation, we'd love to do that with you. So we've and we had been working with the hyperscale customers before we bought the site to make sure that we weren't buying, something that nobody wanted. Right. And immediately after we announced that we got it, we got 2 term sheets in the door from hyperscalers saying we'd like that capacity.
How do you show them what your work without
Carefully.
telling them what you're working.
Yeah, very, very carefully. But I would say in the case of Anthropic and Google, we have a very special relationship. As I indicated, I mean, I've been on site with these folks. I understand how they think. I understand what they're seeking. I have been blown away by their level of partnership. There are a couple of hyperscalers out there that they need to win the negotiation, which means you lose, but they won. There's one or two that likes to draw blood. I would tell you Anthropic and Google are absolutely the most collaborative partners on the planet. And I'm very fortunate to have them as customers, G42 as well. And so when we're looking at stuff, we ask them, how do you feel about this state? What do you feel about, how do you feel about MISA? How do you feel about SPP? You talk in general terms, but you have a general sense for what they're looking for. What would be the smallest you'd go to? What would be the biggest? Would you want to take down a whole site like that? Show us your demand curves. So we talk to them. When it's not those guys, we try and give a general notion of the geography, of the price of electricity, of the availability of the power, what our expectations would be for financing, because if I can't get a customer to sign a contract that Patrick could then go finance at what we consider competitive terms, I'm not doing it. NVIDIA is evolving to that market. They're not there yet, but they're evolving there.
Seems like there's some people out there waiting on NVIDIA to figure out what they want to do from like the credit wrapper perspective before we start to see maybe the next onslaught of deals. Do you buy that thesis?
I really think that there's a few things going on in the space. Google is very thoughtful, prescient, and they get it. Microsoft is back in the market in a powerful way, and they get it. Amazon gets it, sometimes goes back and forth between this notion of maybe I want to have power with it and have some role in that. Meta gets it, going back and forth between the notion of a co-location versus grid, versus island generation. I think NVIDIA has floated the notion of what we have modeled out, what Patrick's done and financed in the market, but to a slightly lesser degree, and it's not been received well. And so they're getting more aggressive, but they haven't printed a deal on those terms yet. For us, as we look at Kentucky, I've been asked all morning, do you feel the need to change your customers, to diversify? And you didn't ask that, but I'm going to give you the answer, which is I don't feel that need. I don't feel that need at this time, because if I wanted to change customers, it would be exclusively for the reason of culturally we were not getting along in an existing relationship. That's not the case. I'm a pretty direct, tough guy. I love my customers. And B, if you needed credit diversity, I am roughly 10% of Google's debt, which is de minimis relative to, they're a top 5 company. They got $35 billion in debt. Maybe I'm 10% of that. It's a pretty good place to be. I can afford to continue with them as a customer and not feel forced to diversify. And there are benefits to not changing customers, by the way. You have a reference design. Everybody knows who to call. There's a lot of reasons to do it, because I think you can give better return to your shareholders by being more and more efficient once you are in the wash, rinse, and repeat stage. There are benefits to adding customers, which is why we're running a robust process. I mean, Carrie is running that process. And, every Monday we're sitting in a room looking at the alternatives and how to value every risk element of that contract. But to date, I think the program that Patrick Fleury came up with is the program that will continue to be identified in the market as a win. By the way, we don't have the best deal out there. I think Hut 8 cut the best deal. Their deal was one-off, unique in time and place. But I've tried to tell my kids who are now adults in their businesses who are negotiating, sometimes you don't have to draw blood in the negotiation. Sometimes it's better to sort of do okay and call it a win and then create a long-term relationship. Sometimes you win the battle, but you lose the war. So we are looking for long-term relationships with G42, Google, Anthropic, and whoever the next customers may be, consistent with the kind of the returns that we've achieved to date and consistent with the financing structures that we've executed to date.
It sounds like, maybe just jumping back a little bit, both, or I guess all, I haven't touched on Maryland yet, but Cayuga could have generation there. Kentucky, generation could be coming as well.
But we have existing 480 megawatts immediately available.
But potential for bringing your own.
Yes, that's true.
And then let's get to Maryland, which is, to me, I think, like the most exciting.
I think it's the coolest site we have.
So yeah, walk through that. Phases, gigawatt of generation, 500 megawatts of battery storage. You're going to deliver more generation to the grid than that's already there. So it's kind of a win for the grid, win for you. What do we got from a timing perspective?
So first of all, that's a very valuable place to be, right? The Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC corridors, you really get amazing returns. Second of all, there aren't many sites with that amount of land where you're going to get the local support that you're going to get in Charles County. I mean, when the rest of the state was saying, we hate data centers, Charles County was saying, please come here. Third, I think this bring your own generation is real. Again, it's real because you then can control it. It's real because it creates absolute redundancy. It's real because even if you don't use it, it's sort of a requirement to get to the front of the queue, which is otherwise a many-year process. Or it's a requirement to get an interconnection for a data center. Montana has just passed this new law about that. Show me your nameplate capacity, I'll give you a data interconnect. If not, you don't get one. So Maryland needs power badly. They shut down all their plants. So we said to them, the site's already generating a small amount of power. It's not good power. It's liquid fuel. We'll repower, but you got to give me a permit so I can go to gas. You got to expedite that. And you got to give me a permit for a 2x500 CCGT power plant, gas fired. They said, yep, you're in writing. They did this in writing before we would close, expediting brownfield remediation. By the way, Kentucky and Maryland have two very sophisticated brownfield remediation programs. That's critical as you want to think about sites, because those sites are going to be the best ones for you because they have the energy infrastructure. But you got to be able to understand it and price that risk of remediation. And we've done that. Of course, we've owned a lot of power plants and we've shut them down and mitigated. But I think that's hard for a lot of folks. So Maryland, you have surplus generation estate that's desperately short power. You have in PJM, we get to the front of the queue for an interconnect because we're bringing our own power. You have a county that's desperate for the jobs and tax revenue generation. It's an industrial site that they want you to clean up. I mean, it's a fantastic win. And, we were chasing it for a long time. I'm not going to give Carrie's group credit for this because I wanted that site for a very long time from GenOn. And I think it's going to turn out to be the model for what companies have to do. And take a look at the difference between that and the Oracle deal. Like Oracle did the deal, right? Island generation. But these deals require not only equity, but a lot of debt. And if you're a lender in that deal, what was the issue? They're building this thing in the middle of nowhere so nobody would complain about it. Massive generation facility. They're going to overbuild so they can say they have redundancy. But if you're a lender, what's the problem? What happens if Oracle goes down? And this was reflected in what happened and in the pricing of the debt. The answer is you don't have a way to evacuate your electricity to get it to the market to get paid. You had to make the bet, which they charged you for, that transmission will get to that facility. Morgantown is in a transmission superhighway. Like it's a combination, every major transmission system, the Western world. It's phenomenal. So it was a unique site with great gifts. And I think that we're seeing a lot of interest, by the way, reflected in that site. But we'll get to it in due course. We're not terribly worried about it now, except once FERC approves the deal, we'll already be a generator. So we'll start seeing generation revenue. At some point when it's all built out, because I still want to ultimately get to be a REIT, we'll move that generation to another vehicle. We'll probably keep that generation in a separate vehicle so that we can sort of find our way to REIT them. But I believe it's the model for the next phase of our industry.
Do you think every additional site from here on out will have some generation aspect to it? Or would you still be open to buying a primarily grid-connected site today?
Happy to buy grid-connected sites if we can work with the utility, if it's not going to be a predatory relationship, and if we would have immediately available power. I think having the generation, again, I've told you, it's enabling from a permitting process, from a redundancy process, from getting the buy-in of the community or the grid for the state regulatory parties. It's an advantage. It's not something we must exclusively have, but it certainly is an advantage.
There's been some rumblings about just like credit uneasiness in the private credit market. Maybe a lot of people were overexposed to one name, like an Oracle or somebody else. Do you think this has an impact on you guys? You guys have done a great kind of deal so far, be able to secure financing for Lake Mariner. I guess how are you guys navigating the private credit one?
Right. So as I said earlier, if, not everybody is a Google, not everybody's a G42. I am happy to have continued exposure to Google because of what your bankers and Morgan Stanley's bankers are telling me I could finance that. And if you take a look at where our debt trades, it's exceedingly competitive values. And so I am only keen, however, to sign up customers of that super high quality credit. Oracle's trading, several hundred basis points behind where we would be. And I think some people, did look at that at Oracle and say, hey, what's up? But, our shop, I don't know how many of you know us. We've been together a long time. Patrick, our CFO, and I have been friends for forever, but he was my partner because he managed the fleet of power plants from Blackstone's perspective that I managed for Blackstone. So we've been partners a long time. Carrie and I are together over 15 years. She came from Goldman. Nazar and I are together 25 years. He came from Evercore. Sean Farrell, partner over a dozen years, came from Siemens Westinghouse. My general counsel, 20 years, came from Paul Weiss. My chief risk officer came from Deloitte, over 20 years. The team's been together a really long time. And that exists, by the way, all the way vertical through my organization. If you go to my site at Lake Mariner, I have kids and grandkids of my operators from when I was operating power plants up there. And we've moved people from my Montana plant, Gary Arneson, all the way to New York, just to share that expertise. It's a long way of saying execution is what we do, what we're respectfully would submit we're good at. The only way I can mess up is on the execution side, but I think we're built for execution. And if we don't have surety of payment. Surety of payment means the absolute best quality customer in the space. I don't want to take risk with that. I want to know I'm getting paid. I want to know I can service my debt. It's that simple. So we will land only super high quality credits for customers. And, we're happy for others to, if they want to be creative, that's great, but that's not what we do.
forward to all the future announcements at Mariner, Cayuga, Kentucky, and Maryland, hopefully within the next 6 months.
We have advised the market, we'll be landing a customer in Kentucky certainly before the end of the second quarter. Carrie's been kicking me all morning because I think it's going to be sooner than that. But I really appreciate all of your confidence in our company and support to date. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.